This is the Nebuchadnezzar on approach, requesting access through Gate 3.
Nebuchadnezzar, this is Zion Control. Maintain present velocity and stand by. The Nebuchadnezzar is down. Phase 7.
Understood.
Zion was kind of a purposeful contrast to the minimalist contemporary vibe of the Matrix.
Zion's semi-retro kind of design that carries across from the almost Victorian period or the 30s of when they built the Bay Bridge or the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and big industrial kind of works. There's that kind of engineering quality.
Zion is the kind of society that is, in a way, a free society, a democratic society, where everyone inside that society understands and knows what their role is.
It's a world that is multi-ethnic, and primarily, I would say the majority of people are people of color.
I thought the representation of all the ethnic groups was just, you've never seen that in a science fiction movie at that capacity.
It's mostly like African American or Black and Hispanic and Asian and all. It's just a real mix of people that are non-white or Caucasian, which is what you usually see in most films.
So Zion, I think, is one of those rare occurrences in Hollywood where it reflects what I guess we're calling multiculturalism now.
We're standing in the sewer set. So this is kind of like at the very bottom of the S-bend. So if you imagine the S-bend in your bathroom down the bottom where all the rings and the crap ends up, this is it. You're at the very bottom of it, amongst all the Rio and the crap that's been washed down here over like 1,000 years. And we figured that at this point the world had got so successful because of the kind of underclass of machines, their slave class, they'd been able to have these big mega cities, and these big sewers were here to support those big cities. The whole sewer might have been made up a whole lot of little pipes, which are still huge pipes, like the one on our left, my left here, is a huge pipe where, you know, maintenance vehicles and things like that can go. But it's a difficult set to kind of work in. I think it's a really difficult set for the crew. It's very tight, very confined, and as you can see, all are very strong. Have to be very strong to carry all these big pieces of concrete around. Zion's made up, if you like, of a landing area, which we call the dock, where all the ships, all the hovercraft come in and land, and it's a defence area for the population of Zion.
So I think the first drawing I did of the dock, I don't know, it took me 2.5, 3 weeks or something, because it was so labor-intensive and figuring out the perspective. And Owen had done like a schematic of what the basic shape and what the levels were, because it was almost like steps that would lead down to the main, like, sewer drain, if you want.
And it's kind of like a huge septic tank that's been built into a landing base, where there's cranes and machinery and workshops for working on these hovercraft.
I put like a railroad track around it, because I kept thinking of, you know, have you ever seen like a railroad junction where all the trains come in? And I put that crane on top of the elevator. See, there's action, even when there is no action, there's movement.
And then you go down below the dock via elevators through bedrock where the command centre is, where Harmon has his office and Locke has his command centre. And then you go down below the command level, you go down into the bottomless pit. And it's like a giant sinkhole, and it's like 7,000 feet deep, which is where 250,000 people live.
It's good to be home.
We kind of set it up so that the people were above the council. A democracy, in that you had representatives there from each of the ships or representatives from each level of the bottomless pit. So what we have suggested, without being too accurate, is that this structure, whoever built it, we've added a kind of patina of the centuries. We have a lot of rust. They used polystyrene and they laid it onto the flash and they burnt it all with a heater. And you had this fantastic metal sense, because all of Zion's basically metal, there's no wood. So all the chairs that are in that set, they are all chairs out of the Merovingian's restaurant.
It was kind of a Colosseum kind of space to an extent, but basically it had to be all metal. So it felt like you were, contained in a tin can.
And then you go down below the council to the residence area. There are all these kind of faceless buildings where the residents of Zion live. And every 43 metres is a major kind of level, and in between it there are 10 levels of houses ringing around this naturally formed sinkhole. There's a little model which is the extent of what we will build. It's all made of steel, it's quite structural. There'll be a green screen here and above it at each end, and the visual effects department will build this repetitive kind of design that it has around to create the illusion of the full kind of residence area.
It is this thrown together, makeshift world that these people have been forced to live in, and they made the best of a fairly terrible situation.
Where's my pussy? Hey! Hey! Get to see human ingenuity and how they built up, you know, this world that exists and as many of the conveniences that they can have. Loved it, and it was really great. Like, they had the food growing, the mushrooms. They were like really homey, like all these like handcrafted like little things. Like maybe they all put it together themselves.
So in the first film, everyone lived in a little red house on the outside of a big cylinder. It was the power plant, you know, a pod. And in this film, everyone lives on the inside of a cylinder in a little red hole.
Basically, Zion, it's the power pods in reverse. Instead of projecting from a cylinder, they're living inside a cylinder. They've escaped from one environment to basically live in the same environment. Although they're free, and that's an important part of it.
At the bottom of Zion, there's a huge cave or cavern which the people of Zion use as a gathering place.
Here, Larry and Andy wanted to have the feeling of the natural earth, like we're going almost kind of like back to the womb. Something like a church or a big cathedral.
The super cool part about that particular space was creating it based off the pictures we found in National Geographic about massive underground caves and a lot of photographs of Bryce Canyon sort of rock formations.
The cave is probably half a mile long. Through the use of visual effects, John Gator and his team will increase the height of what we have built to 300 odd feet right in the center at its highest point. Luckily, it's got fabulous acoustics, so someone just whispering can be heard all the way down at the back end.
I give you more.
And then you go down below the caves and they'd have what's called the engineering.
The engine room was sort of beautiful, strangely beautiful, heavily detailed, and almost convoluted underground world. Effectively a steam energy plant that is where the, geothermal energy is derived to power up the city. We based some of those environments off of Jeff Darrow drawings.
Some of these drawings are like this big, and I'd have like this much done after a day.
My theory is that the machines purpose-built Zion for the human beings. But you have to have balance within the system so that you could have a matrix. Within that, there has to be a sense of freedom or rebellion, so you have to have a Zion.
The NEB's like an important part in the first film, was like when Neo first comes aboard.
This is the main deck.
In the first film, it was the only ship we saw, and in this film, there's many more ships. Some big ships on this, some small ships. There's the Magellan, the Vigilant, the Osiris, the Caduceus, and the Logos.
Everybody wanted to draw ships, and some of them are pretty funny.
Do you have any of the, you have your little library of ships by any chance?
Yep.
Okay, we'll show you that.
It's a small class ship.
We're not using that one though, right? Because it's like They thought it was a little too buggy.
I don't know. Some of the guys just, you can't get out of that Star Wars mold, you know?
What do you mean by that?
They look like they're made by GM. They look like Datsuns with wings on them or something. But these things had to look like they're put together and built out of other ships and rebuilt and restructured. And
the whole concept that these machines might have been around for 1,000 years. I mean, you sort of have to look at it, well, if it's been for 1,000 years, when was it last serviced?
And each one had a different function, so they should look different.
These are all the concepts that have been turned into 3D models. The Osiris, known as the small fast ship. It's called the Hunter ship, kind of a little bit more junked up.
The Logos has probably been the most recently serviced, but you don't know when. The amount of grubbiness on it is slightly pulled back a bit.
So it's like the sports car. It gets the Ferrari. This was an alternative design for the Magellan, which was dropped in favour of a Jeff Darrow drawing.
I got to do the Magellan, which is the one I really wanted to do because it's the hammer of God, you know. It's the gunship, it's the Potemkin, it's the Bismarck. I looked at a lot of like Panzer tanks. It's sort of based on an Aztec hammer. If you look at it, it's almost an axe. And I put these scales on it, you know, these big metal plates that they'd put on the size of Panzers and stuff.
There's a landing pad for nearly every ship that Rob has modeled that's sort of shaped around the basic, you know, silhouette that the ship is.
The actual docks themselves, I tried to make them look sort of like aircraft carriers.
Nebuchadnezzar, you are cleared through Gate 3 to Bay 7.
Roger that, Control.
Basically, when the ship gets close to surfaces, it repels an opposite magnetic charge, and we're going to augment that with a nice little blanket, a cushion of electrostatic energy.
Colin? Yes? Can you switch that on, please, mate?
The Neb is a 4-man crew, which is why I think Lincoln must be a super, super smart guy. Because in the first one, they had 7 other people there. They had all these other people to do all these jobs while some people were jacked in. Well, now, 3 of my crew, they're jacked in, and then it's me. So I'm monitoring the Matrix. I must be maintaining the ship, and like, he must be all over the place.
What do we call these things? LEDs.
You know, if I was to be honest and frank, the ship main decks are my least favourite. They're difficult to shoot in. There's a lot of, you know, people around monitors, a lot of people lying in chairs. Not to give the movie magic away, but it's the same ship, you know, that Owen very ingeniously turns around to make it look something completely different each time. He's done a pretty amazing job too.
The Nebuchadnezzar, the Magellan and the Vigilant were all the same floor base and with the same chair mechanisms, but with different cores.
This is being changed into another ship, right?
Yeah, this is turning into the Vigilant.
That's where we turn all the chairs around backwards.
Bit of redressing. As far as I know, the upholstery goes red.
Used to be the Neb, now it's the Vigilant. When was it built? 2106.
The plaque off the Nebuchadnezzar had on it Mark III No. 2.
This is the core, where we broadcast our pirate signal and hack into the Matrix.
And my intention when I picked those numbers was to say this is like a Jaguar, which is like a Mark IV Jaguar. But people took this as a reference to the Psalms, you know, Mark III No. 2. And if you actually read those passages now, they actually have a kind of a relevance to Nebuchadnezzar. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was our ship, and Nebuchadnezzar was a powerful king, and he used to, you know, smite down cities. Well, the Nebuchadnezzar was a battleship. So there was a kind of a strange subtext within the subtext, in a sense. This set as it stands is the Nebuchadnezzar. It looks pretty much identical to what it did in 1998, except it's been altered in a couple of places where it was damaged by the Sentinels. The interesting thing that happened with the Nebuchadnezzar at the end of the first film, it was in fact the only set that we were allowed to keep. And we packed it up, it was put into storage. And then Hugh Badenup, who's the senior art director, he was asked some months later, just before the film was released in America, to put it into shipping containers and ship it over to Los Angeles. And then they used the ship for doing publicity interviews. The design originally came from Jeff Darrow. He did a series of beautiful drawings of how all this should look and work. The idea of this ship is it's like a hovercraft, and that in the centre of the ships, all of the ships that come from Zion, there's what we call the core. Essentially, that is a direct conduit into the matrix. If I was the operator, I'd be taking my needle out, I'd sterilise it, I'd move it all up out of the way, if I can, and I'd take my needle in here. Now, Tim here is my able assistant. I would insert it with force into there and lock it off. He's now locked in. So essentially the monitors, at the moment, they've got generic graphics on them. At various points, they can have exit and entry points. A lot of the time, we could pull up on this screen the health status of the particular character who's in the chair. So there might be heartbeat rates, ECG readings. If we go over to Link's chair, you can do various bits and pieces by, some of these screens are interactive, so I can hit them and I can open up another camera, as you can just see that. Went from one bit to another, brought out this, I can hit it, and then normally what's going to load up is going to be just the chair. Wow, this is fabulous as well. You can indicate, so this kind of gives you a general idea of where there are people in the chair. So this is seat 7, this would be Morpheus's chair, the captain of the ship, and this indicates at the moment, because it's green, that he is in the matrix. Above it, we have other screens, and Link, or AK, can pull various bits of information up. So Link has at his disposal all this huge database, so he can pull up these various screens, and this one is indicating, I think, something in the mountains, which is from another scene with Neo. And then, so for specific scenes, there are specific graphics being generated by Tim and his team.
Everything else.
Should I grab that?
Yeah.
Screen graphics?
It's sort of somewhere between basic sec deck and a special effect. So there's times when it's literally just background stuff, no one pays any attention to it. It's literally just some blinking lights over the shoulders of the actors, but there's other times when the whole scene is based around what they're viewing on the screens.
His neural patterns don't read like someone who's in a coma.
We're known as the wallpaper department. Colour and movement, that's all it's about.
This is the screen graphics department. We're preparing for a scene in the rerouting facility computer room where the Vigilant crew come in and try and hack the main system. So, you know, we not only have to set up the environment that they're in, but, you know, on their screens, the interface and what actually happens on their machines as they're trying to hack this mainframe system. So, you know, there's a fair bit of research that goes into all of this. We visited a power station and got some reference images. Just the kind of stuff you'd expect to see in one of these places, close-ups of the various screens. And it's always great to have, you know, design based on a sense of realism. We'll be producing graphics for the Nebuchadnezzar, the Majolna and the Vigilant, and of course the logos. Graphics will be one thing that's used to help differentiate and give a sense that, oh yes, we are in a different ship now. It does help in that space to have a different sense of colour and shapes.
On the Ned main deck, there's 52 screens. 17 on links, and then each chair around has another 5 screens on each one.
It's supposed to be purely utilitarian stuff that just needs to be there to make the ship operate, to monitor the crew members when they get broadcast into the Matrix. And so it's a balance between making them look interesting and engaging and yet be very sort of functional.
We're in the operations room of the screen graphics. What you've got basically is 27 VCRs, 10 DVDs and 8 computers, a big matrix switch as well, and about 140 cables. We have spy cameras up there above each chair, and also for us to see what's going on. We have patches in from the film camera so we can see what's going on. And we sit down here with all our consoles and make them all work and allow for the actor to be interactive with them.
Keep moving, 65th floor.
A lot of the screens are all touch panels, so they can actually physically make the graphics work from where they are. So if they have a fit of spontaneity and they need to touch all the screens, they'll actually react.
They were a real great tool to have because they give you something to do as I'm doing things, or a sequence of things that go on, you know, and so it gives you real action. You're not just faking it.
We spent a fair bit of time trying to get a system going in the cockpits where we hooked a joystick up to the main control that then got copied out to like 6 to 8 computers.
The advantage of that was that the actors didn't have to try to follow the graphics. The graphics would follow them. Because if you've got a flying indicator that's going like that and they're going the other way, or it's sort of all not matched up. So the idea was to take it so the actors wouldn't have to kind of focus in on the graphics too much. They'd just follow their own movements. On the Majolna, there's a series of gun bays when they're under attack from the Sentinels. This one of one of the gunners. We have to think, well, what would a gunner need to combat these machines? So this is a mock-up that we produced very early in the piece, where we thought that each one of these screens might be an individual gun. Since then, we've had discussions with the directors and they're saying this might be the center screen, but we want to see some other things around it. So we go and subdivide that, you know, those screens to provide information about, you know, temperature, ammunition, some sort of radar system, a map of the tunnel system. So we have to come up with each one of these and animate it, and that can be really difficult.
Commander Lack, I got incoming.
How can that be?
In the command center, we know that these guys are going to be wanting or would be looking at particular information about the dock, what's happening in the dock, the siege with the Sentinels, and so we've created a bunch of radars that give them a real-time update of what's going on in the dock. Then there's information about the descent of the diggers. Basically, it's a matter of finding something appropriate for the set and for that moment in the film.
I didn't have to suspend my imagination so much because I really had everything right there, you know, working for me. It's fantastic.
Screen graphics.
We wanted to do an old-fashioned fist fight, John Wayne fist fight. It's dark, it's fun, it's pushy.
Try not to move too much, right? Just a little bit.
Yeah. I just wanted you to go at full pace, so however, if he was going to shorten his start mark up, that he can, once he sees that you're about to get there, he can just like bound on the gun. This is the only fight that takes place in the real world in which they have no powers. They're not in the Matrix. They're not writing code. They haven't injected any information into themselves. They're just fighting like two human beings would fight, like dogs.
I'll be like in here. Yeah. I'll let you put your hand on me.
Smear, or is it okay? I just don't want to have to find something.
Right.
You know what I mean? If he's got to swing and I've got to find something.
You have to duck one. Basically, he's gonna have to swing. You have to lift your arm, and everyone's gonna have to be in the right spot.
And then can we use something that's not steel?
Yeah, of course. We have some pretty good props.
I can see
Feel good to wear that for a day?
I don't know.
Action. Now I gotta punch here? Just punch right in the chest. We never see his face, so we won't see a connection. Oh, okay.
No wires, no special powers that the Matrix might provide. It's dirty. Using anything available. Bits and pieces, sharp objects, and hot things, hard steel.
You looking forward to that?
I am looking forward to that.
That fist fight takes place in sparks, so it's strobe lights all over the place, and so it makes the fight really surprising. You see blurred glimpses of a fight, which makes it really jarring and horrible and very real in a way. It actually looks like a real fight. It really looks like they've hurt themselves, and they get bloody, and their fists are bloody, and it's like all the things you never see in a real fist fight.